Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And if you've not tuned into the show, if this is your very first Non-Essential Podcast, and you're probably wondering why the hell we called it Non-Essential Podcast, it's because every week we tell two different stories that are very interesting, but ultimately not really essential to anything.
This is a very sober intro.
Show.
Like,
I'm trying to keep the vibe down today.
We've done 11 of these, and it's like we need that MTV audience for this. All right, yo guys, you want to get turned up? You want to get turned with the Non-Essential Podcast? Fucking two crazy facts coming at you, balls out, baby.
Here's some dude that was kind of cool 30 years ago, but now he's 60 and he still pretends to be in college.
Fucking 1800s history, bitch. Trivia, motherfuckers.
Ghost stories.
Mythology, motherfucker. Show we get together.
I'm too old for that vibe.
This show we get together every week and just tell each other two things that were kind of interesting that we found. And that's basically it.
So far, it's been good. Like, one of these weeks, we'll both have stories that were, like, the other one's like, that's not interesting at all. But
we've had them. I'm a good actor. No. It's worked out pretty well. Last week, we talked about a Mormon polygamous cult and Stagecoach Mary, who seemed mostly cool, except a fucking tyrant about lawn care.
I didn't think about it until after the show. There was a tweet this week that I said, and it really made me think, because I would have really loved to see like a showdown between Stagecoach Mary and is it Everil? Am I saying that right?
Ervil LeBaron. And I saw your tweet on that she would pop him in the mouth. And it's like, I just rolled my eyes at that because it's like,
it was intentionally like being,
I know, but it's just like, every fucking cartel or mafia guy, all he needed was a good whack in the face by, that lovable whiskey drinking, gun toting Stagecoach
postal carrier. Yeah.
It was Stagecoach Mary, right?
Yeah. Mary Fields is her actual name, but Stagecoach Mary or Black Mary, because apparently that was a good idea for a nickname.
Yeah, like every famous black person, that's how you immortalize them. It's just
I like to think just at the time nobody knew any other Marys that were black. They're like, that's the one Black Mary. It's like, I don't think so.
Can we do that?
I bet there's more.
Can we flip that around to white people? So it's white Hi, George
welcome
Washington.
Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm White Steve. I think that would give a very wrong impression on what our show is.
Thank you, Brother White Steve. We will now pass off the talking hood to Brother White Ben. That's a very bad show. It wouldn't last long. Hopefully this show will. Because this week I got you mentioned something talking about Stagecoach Mary last week that we always seem to talk about shitty people, or at least a lot of the time we do. And that's not really going to change. I'm always
shitty people are interesting. I mean,
right. And it's either they're like shitty people, and they do shitty things, or they're really bad at what they're trying to do.
That's true too. They've not all been like bad people, but the ones that aren't, either really bad stuff happened to them, or they just just dumb lucked into a situation.
And I kind of that's true today. There is some incompetence in today's story, but it actually ends up being I thought it ended up being kind of a heartwarming tale about the first and to date only emperor of the United States.
Nice.
Joshua A. Norton was born sometime around the year 1818 in what we expect was a part of London today. Not much is known about his early life, except that he was Jewish, and at some point he sailed with his family to South Africa in 1820. In 1849, he received a $40,000 inheritance from his father and moved to San Francisco, where he quickly gained a fortune in real estate and imports. which, you know, it's good.
That sounds fishy.
You know, it's a good business model if it's like vague enough that Pablo Escobar could say he was in on it.
Right.
But this isn't about, you know, some drug cartel guy. Norton was actually seen as a genuinely great businessman who actually somehow prioritized ethical behavior and fair dealing. But unfortunately, one failed attempt to corner the market on rice would end up ruining Norton's fortune. He put everything he had into cornering the market, and then 2 random ships just showed up in San Francisco at some point carrying a fuck ton of rice, which caused the prices to plummet. So I don't actually know anything about markets, stocks, or investments. So anytime I hear about somebody losing a ton of money, I can only imagine that scene at the end of Trading Places where like the old fuckers are like, turn the machines back on, as they just lose everything. And that's basically what happened to Norton, I imagine. He lost all the money he had tied up into the rice and lost all of his real estate holdings on top of that. So
the rice game, she's a bitch.
Yeah, it's hard dealing. You should have gotten into that Coke money, man. Having everything and then losing it all tends to have a powerful effect on a person, but nobody probably expected what would happen to Norton. He retired, but then he reemerged into the public eye in 1859 with a proclamation in the San Francisco Bulletin which stated, "At the peremptory request and desire of a large majority of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States and direct the representatives of the different states of the Union to assemble in Musical Hall. Then and there to make such alterations in the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which the country is laboring, and thereby cause confidence to exist, both at home and abroad, in our stability and integrity. Norton I, Emperor of the United States."
First off, congratulations on getting through that without like tripping over everything like I would have.
Yeah, I had to rehearse. He also, besides being the Emperor of the United States, he would also later add the title Protector of Mexico.
Well, yeah, I mean.
But he's just some dude hanging out in San Francisco. Like, he doesn't leave. Like, he's just in town.
That's what I'm liking this guy so far, because that was kind of my whole approach back when I
when you
was
lost
doing the
everything,
games journalism and stuff. Like, yeah, it's just like I
king.
am now this thing.
You're a king of games journalism.
I didn't quite go that far with it, but
maybe you should have.
Yeah, I mean, you can get pretty. Yeah, I probably should. I did learn you can get pretty far in something by just saying that you are that thing.
Yeah, if you say you're the best at shit, people will just believe it, or it'll be like this guy and they won't care.
Right. It's like, whatever. That's kind of weird.
So he began wearing military coats with brass buttons, ribbons, and medals. He had a beaver hat topped with feathers, and he carried a walking stick with a snake head on top. And he also carried a sword and a faded umbrella. So
he's like Davy Crockett plus like the Shaman of the West and samurai. Yeah, I like it. Like,
he's an emperor for sure.
Cool shit at pawn shops. He's like, I'll take that.
I'm just saying, one-on-one with the president, I'm picking Josh Norton. And like, you put those two in a cage, Norton's walking out. And that's hashtag my emperor. But despite his eccentricities, he ingrained himself in the day-to-day affairs of his community. He attended churches, theaters, musical affairs, gatherings, school commencements. He also liked to go to places of business, just like markets, docks, and construction sites. He just did all this shit thinking he was the Emperor of America, so he's like way a part of the town. He just believed he was in charge of it all.
See... we've got a couple clients. There's one in particular that they
I
tell
love that
stories
you can
like
immediately tie it to Ohio.
Yeah. I think everywhere has these people. I've not had anybody come in and tell me that they're the emperor of, the United States or even Ohio. But I had a guy tell me how he used to be Marilyn Monroe's bodyguard and he knew JFK personally. It's like, Calvin Coolidge was a good friend of mine. And another woman, I don't know what it is with John F. Kennedy, but we have another client that says that she had John F. Kennedy and he was one of her students in preschool, which is interesting because JFK would be about 30 years older than her.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so I can see how this guy's going around saying that he's the emperor, and people just kind of smile and nod like, okay.
Well, here's, that's why this was actually, I really liked this story, and it wasn't dark like a lot of my other shit. Norton was crazy, but he wasn't dumb or mean. He was well-versed in current affairs and almost always gentle and courteous. The only time he ever was known to become violent was one time a cartoonist drew kind of a mocking caricature of him, and when he saw it through a shop window, he yelled, "It is an insult to the dignity of an emperor," and he smashed the glass with his walking stick.
Well, I mean, sure.
Yeah, and he's right. You don't talk about the emperor like that. Think. That's Josh Norton, man.
I love that name, too. It's perfect for an emperor, like Emperor Josh Norton.
Norton the First. And one time he was arrested by an overzealous cop and taken before the Commissioner of Lunacy to be committed. But he was quickly released with an apology that stated Emperor Norton had shed no blood, robbed no one, and despoiled no country, which is more than can be said of his fellows in that line. So, like, the guy's like, yeah, he's crazy, but he's not hurting anyone. What might be more crazy than anything was that the city fell in love with Norton. Supposedly, every restaurant and saloon would make sure the emperor was fed. He didn't often drink. And the Masons gave him a stipend which covered the 50-cent rent for his small room in the Eureka lodging house. Newspapers ran his proclamations mostly to laugh at, but one was surprisingly prescient when he ordered the construction of a, quote, Bay Bridge. He also regularly ordered Congress to be dissolved, as well as abolishing the Democratic and Republican parties, so he wasn't completely crazy.
No, yeah, I was going to say, I'm liking this guy more and more.
Yeah, we might have fucked up not giving him supreme power. One notable moment for Norton was during an anti-Chinese demonstration. These demonstrations also often led to riots and fatalities in San Francisco, and allegedly during one, Norton stood between the rioters and their Chinese targets, and with a bowed head started reciting the Lord's Prayer repeatedly until the rioters dispersed. So people are like, well, fuck, Norton's in the way.
We like him.
Yeah, Norton's telling us to back off. Let's back off. So Emperor Norton, conqueror of hate. Another notable point in his life was a feud with Frederick Coombs, another San Francisco eccentric who believed he was George Washington. Coombs... Go ahead.
No, yeah, it's just such a great mental image. A guy that sounds lovable, but like he's walking around like, I am the Emperor of the United States, and somebody else is like, well, I'm George Washington. Yeah. It's like, well, how about ye?
Yep, it's pretty great. Coombs would wear a Continental Army uniform of tan buckskin and would spend most of his time planning his Revolutionary War campaigns. He even went so far as to starve himself until he was convinced the Battle of Valley Forge was actually over. His feud with Norton began when Emperor Norton had torn down some posters Coombs had put up, and Coombs responded by telling the Alta California newspaper that the reason Norton would have done such a thing was because Norton was, quote, jealous of my reputation with the fairer sex. Bam.
Well, yeah.
Coombs fucking got
him. Those women, you got an emperor that's got a military coat and sword and umbrella and whatever the fuck you said, or George Washington. You know which way the women are going to go.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we talk about George Washington and his bullshit cherry tree crap in every first grade history class. Nobody gets to hear about Emperor Norton. The Alta California ran the story mocking the insanity of the two men, and both Coombs and Norton demanded a retraction. But Norton took his response a step further when he ordered the chief of police to seize upon the person of Professor Coombs, falsely called Washington No. 2, as a seditious and turbulent fellow, and to have him sent forthwith, for his own good and the public good, to the state lunatic asylum for at least 30 days. So that's fucking fantastic. The Emperor of America saying, dude, this guy thinks he's George Washington. He's crazy.
Yeah, he's causing trouble and he's nuts. Get him out. Go on.
I don't know if Coombs actually believed he would be put in an asylum because the emperor demanded it, but he did leave for New York almost immediately afterwards.
Maybe he realized that George Washington was an East Coast fellow, and he's like, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong state.
Yeah, that's basically what happened. There's a little more stuff on Coombs, but I didn't end up putting it in because I feel like you could do a more researched thing about him and his fucking... Well, yeah, obviously you could. It's George Washington, for fuck's sake. So, yeah, it kind of... Norton's life kind of wraps up here, but... It's interesting, like, he attended any place he wanted for free, and banks would even honor his imperial checks. There's no sign that he ever took extensive advantage of these generosities, though. At the
That's
time,
what I was going to say. It doesn't sound like he was walking around like, I want a Bentley.
Right.
Okay.
He never, he never ate more than he needed. He lived in a room just big enough to keep a bed in. And he was enjoying the like, he could get into, like, theaters and stuff for free. But it was like they wanted him there because he was a part of their community. At the time of his death, he only had like $5 or $6 on him in change. And his death happened in 1880 when he collapsed and died on the street. 10,000 San Franciscans attended the madmen who ruled the United States for 23 years funeral. So
he's my new favorite president. So
yeah, definitely, he's definitely a weird dude. But it's like you hear about people going crazy and stuff, and like this seems like the best way you could go crazy, like for everything to kind of work out. Where
it worked out for everybody. Like the townspeople had, they liked it. It was almost like a mascot for them.
Town loved it, loved him. He loved the town. He just thought he was in control.
Didn't die under a bridge somewhere, like homeless.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you got to go crazy, one, make yourself the emperor of everything, and then two, make sure you're hanging out with good people. It's just so different than like how it is now. Like now you see like homeless people who struggle with mental illness or whatever, and like you can't get further away from them. Like the natural impulse is to like it's almost a fear to be around them and stuff, and like. You hear stories occasionally, though, like, wow, a guy reached out to one of these people. That's great. But by and large, there's a real stigma, not even like with mental illness, but like just homeless in general. Like, oh, that's a dangerous person or whatever. And like, it is nice to see that, like, in a time where in a lot of ways the world was a lot more brutal, to see like in some ways it was almost better. Because like there were these tight-knit communities, and like if somebody was struggling with those things, like they didn't know what the fuck to do for Norton, but they helped him in the way like they could.
They all realized that something wasn't right with him, but also that he wasn't hurting, a danger or a problem. Like and so he was like a part of their town, and I thought that was pretty cool. Now, I imagine he probably did have to endure a lot of, like, people being asses to him, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and I talked about, like, a large part of it was the, like, mockery. Like, a lot of what they liked was to mock out his proclamations and shit. But at the same time, 1800s, what are you going to do for him? Like, I said, they didn't know what was wrong with him. And because it was harmless, like he wasn't like, do this or I'll kill 10 people. Like, it was fun to laugh at. Like, a Bay Bridge. Look at Norton go. And then, like,
That's what's so funny, too. Like, as crazy as you have to be to walk around... I'll backtrack that a little bit. I don't mean that in the, like, stigmatic sense of, like, oh, crazy, like, whatever. But as odd as it is to get to a place where you honestly think... you're the emperor of the United States and the protector of Mexico. He's still, like you said, it sounds like a lot of the things that he said and that he rallied for,
they were that
good
off.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they weren't like these far-fetched, because I mean, it would be easy to be like, I'm the emperor of the United States. We should build a farm that feeds everyone in the world. And so, well, anybody could say that, but
right. But these were all like really
feasible,
kind of like,
right?
Yeah. Some of them are not so feasible. Like there, you could go through a whole. He wrote a lot of proclamations and sent them into papers. But yeah, and a lot of them had to do with like, honoring this like one of San Francisco's favorite dogs or some shit. And it's like, it's really he's a character, and you could probably look up a lot more info than I got on him.
I'm kind of mad now that the San Francisco Giants aren't the San Francisco Nortons.
What's interesting is that there have been petitions to change the name of like the bridge to the Joshua Norton Bridge or the Emperor Norton Bridge, and I would be all for that.
You could even just call it like the Emperor Bridge, because that sounds like you don't necessarily need to know the story behind it. It sounds like, oh, it's just this big, impressive bridge. Like,
to be fair, I think, like I said, this is in some ways this guy is way more important to me than George Washington. In some ways, George Washington too is more interesting to me than George Washington. But yeah, that's what I got this week.
It's a neat story.
Yeah,
and it's nice to not be talking about like either, like you said, bad people or bad things.
Well, we'll get back to that next week, but
no, we'll get back to that here, like now.
Oh, hey.
So there's a good chance you'll be familiar with this, because my story this week happened very recently, 5 years ago, exactly, or not exactly, but about 5 years ago.
Minute. It's really,
and yeah, to the minute. I planned this fucker out in advance, but no, it only happened about 5 years ago, and it was kind of your neck of the woods, though. In fairness, I'm like your typical Midwesterner that just generalize anything on the West Coast. That's like, you're all West Coast people.
Yeah, you'll talk about some shit that happened to Montana, and I'll be like, I've been there twice in my life.
But okay, so my story this week's about Elisa, I think I'm saying that right, Elisa Lam. She was a 21-year-old student at Vancouver's University of British Columbia when she decided to embark on a trip down the United States West Coast. On January 26, she was into her trip at this point. On January 26, 2013, she made it to Los Angeles, and 2 days later, she checked into a hotel known as the Cecil Hotel. She'd spend the next few days exploring the city and making daily phone calls to her parents. Every single day, she made sure to call her parents back in Vancouver and check in and just, let them know what's going on.
Yeah.
She was scheduled to check out of the hotel on January 31st. So she was going to spend like 3 days there, 3 or 4 days, not a long time. This was like a road trip type trip. But January 31st came and she did not check out. Her parents did not get a phone call from her on that day either. So they immediately filed a missing person report and flew to LA to assist the police. The police, I'm shocked that it didn't seem to be more resistance starting a missing persons search, because she was 20, I said 21, 21-year-old that's like going on a trip on her own. You say, oh, she didn't check in or check out and she didn't call us. A lot of the times law enforcement just goes, well, she's an adult. What
right.
can we do?
Yeah. I've seen that in person happen a lot, where it's like, we need resources to find this person. And it's like, well, they're technically an adult if they don't want to be found. And it's like, God damn it.
I mean, and they'll do it, but they do this like, well, call us when it's been 3 weeks. It's like, but
it's like, I don't need your help in 3 weeks. Like,
right. We know something's wrong now, and in this case, they seem to have taken it very seriously right from the get-go. So I guess that's good. They interviewed the hotel staff, and many of the staff members had seen Elisa the previous day. She was always alone. She wasn't with anybody. She wasn't traveling with anybody. There was nobody like following her around or whatever. The woman working at the bookstore next door to the hotel had seen her when she entered the store, and she'd even had a conversation with her. She said that Alicia seemed to be in a very like outgoing and happy person. She was in the store looking for gifts to take home to her parents, and she talked about she had picked out a book, but she was kind of talking about how she was worried that the book might be too heavy because she still had more trip to go, and she would have to carry it with her the whole time until she got back. they had this right away, but it would be a week before they'd release it to the public. But the only other thing that they had to go on was a security video showing Elisa in the hotel's elevator. The video is easy to find online. I watched it. You can look for it, and it's all over the place. But the video itself is really the launching point for a lot of the theories surrounding Elisa's mysterious disappearance. The video itself is a little longer than 4 minutes. In it, you can see her enter the elevator, and at multiple times, it looks like she's either talking to herself or talking to somebody that's just outside the screen range. The video is taken from inside the elevator car itself.
Yeah.
So you can't tell if she's like talking to herself or if there's somebody standing out in the hallway that you just can't see. She's clearly agitated. She pushes a bunch of the buttons on the control panel. She appears to be like hiding from someone from time to time. Like she'll duck into the corner and kind of be like peeking around the door. Occasionally she'll jump, like literally like jump into the hallway and look both ways and then jump back into the car. She's like, her arms are moving, like gesticulating wildly, like she's very vocal with her hands. But the whole time she's, pressing these buttons on the elevator and doing all this stuff, and the doors are just sitting there open and nothing seems to happen. Eventually she steps out of the elevator and the doors close, and that's the last time that she would ever be seen alive. The Cecil Hotel is a fairly famous hotel, but for all the wrong reasons. The hotel has been around for a long time, and it survived the Depression in the 30s, but barely. The crumbling like amenities or the dated amenities and the crumbling like building really mirror the devastation that the whole area of LA went through, during the Depression. A lot of that, it's a hotel that's in Skid Row now. It's not, a nice hotel. It's not in a nice part of town.
Yeah.
And as we all know, seedy hotels tend to attract seedy clientele. It is claimed that the Cecil Hotel is one of the last places that Elizabeth Short was ever seen alive, and she was the victim in the famous Black Dahlia murder. There was a woman named Goldie Osgood, but she was better known as Pigeon Goldie, due to her habit of regularly feeding pigeons in a nearby square. She's just one of those characters, kind of like...
That's just a shit nickname.
It is, but she kind of fits it.
Video game Ben.
But it's kind of like your Emperor thing, where she was older, she was in her mid-60s, and she wore the same LA Dodgers cap every day. She'd go down to the square and feed the pigeons. So just everybody knew her and everybody liked her. But like if you said, "Oh, did you see Pigeon Goldie today?" They'd be, "Oh yeah, she was out there on the." It's just one of those people that when even in a big city, when you're like in a small little section of it like that, people get to know each other.
Right.
She was she lived at the hotel for 6 years, and on June 4th, 1964, she was found raped and murdered in her room. So lovely ending.
How many like disappearances, murders, rapes, like how many violent crimes can happen in a location or around a location before we get to shut it down as just like an evil part of our geography?
Yeah. Right. Like we have a hotel fairly close to us. It's a hotel that's like right next to our mall here. It's almost exactly a mile from my house. I know that because I used to run. And it has constant problems with like people cooking meth and prostitutes and domestic violence. It's just one of those hotels it's not a rent by the hour hotel, but it might as well be.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where our city stepped in and they're like, you need to fucking do something. Like they weren't checking, they weren't very strict about checking IDs. They didn't require credit cards like most hotels do. That's why it attracted all this stuff. And the owners it was funny. The owners came out and said, well, what can we do? You should just have a police officer that works here 24/7. And of course the city's like, fuck that. We're not paying for you to have security. Like
Yeah.
You need to step up and do something. But they literally gave him an ultimatum. They said, fix this within like a month or we will shut you down. So yeah, that stuff does happen. You'll like this one. A few years before Miss Osgood, Pigeon Goldie was murdered, somebody staying at the hotel left a suicide note for her husband before leaping out the 9th floor window. She did not survive, and neither did the homeless man that she landed on.
Fuck.
Right.
Why would I enjoy that? That's the worst.
I like setting you up just to...
Oh my God. Like, how fucking mad I would be in the afterlife if somebody's bullshit suicide took me out too.
Do you think their ghosts are like stuck together?
I fucking hope so. I would make that person's an afterlife living like you thought living sucked.
There's actually been multiple suicides at the hotel, though in fairness, I don't think that's really that uncommon for hotels. We don't like to think about it, but like if you're going to off yourself, I think it's pretty common to go to a place like that.
They usually, there's a tendency to go to places where you'll be found.
Found, but not like, you don't want to like, oh, I'm not going to kill myself in my parents' house because I don't want them to have to clean it up.
Yeah, you're detached from your life, but like I guess there's like that suicide forest in Japan or whatever where people really want to get the hell away from everything. And I think a big part of that too, though, even the hotel and the suicide forest, I think that part of the same thing there is, of course, depression's the leading thing driving suicide. And when you're depressed, your natural tendency is to just get away somewhere. You don't care where. I don't know what you're talking about. I think the number one cause of suicide is thrill seeking.
Thrill-seeking. Woo! Your ghost is floating wherever it goes, and it's like, that was fun.
Hell yeah, man. We found the edge.
So yeah, the suicide thing, there was multiple I pointed out the one because how often do you hear about somebody jumping off a building and fucking landing on somebody?
And she was, or that, was it she or he? You said wrote the suicide letter to her husband. The woman killed herself and she landed on a, yeah. All right, so then her falling down like, oh, fuck, I actually can't, it's not like a fucking NES game, I can't control falling.
Well, you figure she flung herself, because that tends to be one of those things you just go. Like, you don't look and plan, it's just you have to convince yourself, I'm going to jump, and then she probably had no idea she was going to land on a person. It goes so fast, and that guy probably had no idea what the fuck was going to happen. But to me, it almost makes it worse that it was a homeless man, because it's like he's already got in a shitty situation. Now some woman just lands on him from 9 stories up.
Yeah, I don't believe in luck, but that guy has the worst luck of all time.
Or he found a magic lamp and he said, man, I wish it was just women diving all over me.
And the genie was a piece of shit. Yeah. Where he took it really literally. It just, I always hate that stuff. Like, I want to be rich. Oh, you want bees rich? And then it just throws bees at you.
Or you're made of like chocolate and you're like, haha, you're rich tasting.
Yeah, it's like, that's not what I meant at all. And you fucking knew that.
I knew it, right. Genies are dicks.
Yeah. But, so fucked up hotel. People are dying.
It gets better.
Great.
In the mid-'80s, the hotel was allegedly used by the serial killer Richard Ramirez, who is better known as the Night Stalker, who rented a room there for a few weeks during his murder spree.
Of course. Why the fuck not?
No. Yeah, and when I say spree, it sounds like I kind of thought you might be familiar with the Night Stalker.
Yes. I've definitely heard of him.
Yes, his spree is definitely a spree. If you can stomach those sorts of things, he's easy to look up because he's one of the more famous serial killers. Yeah,
he's one of the more, like a lot of serial killers, they kind of get caught and they become very, like they still love the fame of what they've done, but they become very like kind of, I know I did a bad thing, and all that shit. Richard Ramirez is more kind of what media presents serial killers as, is just the really unapologetic, I did it for Satan type.
Yeah, no remorse,
evil,
no remorse, and he, well, I was reading through his. I didn't do extensive research on him, but I was reading through the Wikipedia thing, and his first murder was like an 8-year-old girl that he raped and murdered. It's like, so you're, and it goes on. I can't say it gets worse because you can't really get worse than raping and murdering a kid.
You're already starting at a high point.
But he keeps it at that high point, and he keeps it going quickly too. Like, he was not one of these, I killed somebody and then I waited 6 years and then killed somebody. He was just like, fuck, I'm going to kill people all the fucking time.
And apparently this was his favorite hotel. No, I think sorry to interrupt, but I think it was Richard Ramirez. Like, how he got caught was just like he tried to kill someone, and like he did it in a neighborhood, and then like I think like just a bunch of people in the neighborhood chased him down and beat the fuck out of him.
I hope so. I
don't know if that's
like I was reading through all of his like murders and crimes, and I got to a point. I'm like, that's all I need to know about this guy. He's bad.
Like I'm somebody who watches a lot of like killer documentaries and stuff, and he's one of the few where it's like, if I see a documentary about him, I kind of have to like build myself up to watch it, because it's like, all right, I know this is going to go a long way.
I don't want to say humanize it, but a lot of times you can kind of see how it happened, where it came from, why they did what they did. He didn't even really seem to have like a particular type that he was. Sometimes he would rape women. Sometimes he'd kill them afterwards. Sometimes he didn't. He beat and raped people and left them alive.
Yeah.
He also shot some people that he tried to kill that managed to survive. But I mean, there's a whole lot of bodies and victims in his wake.
He was, like I said, he was like the more what we think of as like, because the other serial killers are evil pieces of shit, but there's a subtlety to how they conduct themselves. So there's a lot of times where it's like you see interviews with these types of people and you think like, man, if I didn't know what he did, I would just think he was a normal person, you know?
Right.
And like it's deceptive how they kind of blend in and act like they're normal, even though they have all this fucking evil in their head. And like I said, Richard Ramirez, you see any quote from him or something, it's like, yeah, that fucker was off his rocker. He was
just
a total
literally
piece
like
of
when
shit.
you hear pure evil. Yeah, that's
yeah.
So he's apparently stayed there for a couple weeks during the murder spree.
And Jack Nicholson from The Shining apparently also stayed.
Well, international serial killer Jack Unterweger also is said to have stayed at the Cecil. While he was a resident there, he was responsible for the rape and strangulation deaths of 3 sex workers. He did get, obviously eventually got convicted of, along with multiple murders in Austria and Czechoslovakia. Yeah. And the shitty thing about Jack is that he'd actually been caught and convicted after his very first murder in Austria and sentenced to life in jail. And he did a lot of time in jail. But he eventually managed to get released under some rehabilitation program where they had stamped him as rehabilitated. He was not. And even more, it's ironically, or I think it's more moronically, after he got out, he managed to start a moderately successful career as a journalist, and he was given a job to go to LA specifically to write about crime and sex work. So that's why he was in LA.
No one would know it better. Jesus.
Right. Like, who made that fucking decision?
That's the fucking nuts. Like, that's, I've kind of mentioned it, I think, on the show. I'm not for the death penalty and stuff. And like, I do believe a lot of times in the idea of rehabilitation, but a lot of rehabilitation programs are complete bullshit where it's just like some dude saying like, I think he's good. I think he's ready to go.
This alcoholic, he's good. Let's give him a bar.
And it's like wait. It's no, like, that fucker should still be under constant surveillance.
Right.
Like,
they figured that out eventually, and they did catch him. And I didn't read what is in. I think he just got life in jail, because I think in Austria they didn't have the death sentence at that point. But I could be wrong. I didn't. Again, this story wasn't about him, but these are the people that have all been linked back to the same hotel. And there's more stories. These are the ones that are like actually verifiable through history. Although when I say verifiable, like I said, both the Night Stalker and him were said to have stayed there, but But it's very plausible because it's the area that they were both staying.
Yeah. So maybe if you travel at all, do some research on the hotel you're staying at. Maybe that extra $30 a night is worth it.
So given the colorful history of this hotel, and the fact that there seems to be like this never-ending, like going all the way back like to the Depression, like the 30s, this never-ending trail of depression and violence. And when you take that like in conjunction with this video of Elisa in the elevator, like acting extremely weird, like you can watch, like I say, you look it up, you can see it for yourself.
I've seen the elevator video. I didn't know much about the story beyond that. It was just kind of like a missing persons.
That's what I mean. I knew it was a big story at the time, and you're kind of out that way-ish. Yeah. But anyway, when you take those two things together, that's what led to a lot of people, of course, on the internet believing that the hotel is haunted and that she was attacked or possessed by some sort of like curse or vengeful spirit.
Yeah, of all the things you could be afraid of, it was probably supernatural. No,
right?
They're fucking
course,
crazy.
The police have a brain, so they didn't just write this off as "Yep, ghost got her."
Yeah. Classic case, Johnson.
As the search for Elisa continued into its third week, the hotel guests started complaining about a lack of water pressure, odd color to the water, and a bad taste. So one of the hotel employees went up to the roof where their water supply came from, which was supplied through 4 large metal drums. And when they went to investigate, sure enough, they found Alicia's body floating in one of the tanks. So...
fucking gross.
Yeah, it sucks, but then you realize one of the complaints was bad taste to the water.
Yeah, that's the...
Right.
Yeah, if your water ever tastes funny, man, get yourself a pure filter and take it with you. This show brought to you by
chlorine
Pure
and dead
Filters.
girls.
Yeah.
So gross and gruesome, but at least they had found her.
Yeah.
When they found her, she was floating in the tank, completely naked, with the majority of her belongings floating in the tank with her. So that answered where she was. The only problem is it made the mystery of what had happened like more mysterious. According to the internet, there's 4 possible scenarios: ghosts and curses, murder, suicide, or accidental death. So I thought I'd start.
Accidentally fucking jumped into that tub of water. What the fuck?
Well, I'll start with ghosts. That's stupid. Ghost stories are fun, but a serial killer spirit didn't drown Elisa in a water tank, either physically or through possession. That's not a thing. So we can just... Yeah, I'm sorry, internet. I know it's a fun thing to discuss, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, first thing you have to do is actually prove that ghosts exist. You haven't done that yet. Let's move on to reality.
Plus, it would be weird to have this cursed hotel that everybody else naturally killed themselves, but then it's like, fuck, we've had a while. It's been since the 80s since the serial killer stayed here, so let's just possess somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm crossing ghosts off the list.
Well, I'm gonna highlight it, and we'll come back to it.
Circle back around.
You're right, because there's still a chance.
So that takes us to murder. Proponents of this theory point out a lot of different clues that they say point towards foul play. For instance, access to the roof itself is locked, requiring a key code that only employees have. And even if you manage to force the door open, it would trigger an alarm, and no alarms had been triggered. But Elisa's room, like all hotel rooms that are not on the ground floor, had access to a fire escape. And it was later determined, and even there was a YouTuber from China who got obsessed with this story that rented a room and went out there to see if he could recreate the events. And he filmed himself going up to the fire escape, and you can get to the roof via the fire escape. So that's most likely how she did it.
Or how he took the body up there.
Well, true. Yeah. Various reports state that these 8-foot-tall water tanks do not have a permanently attached ladder, and that the employee who did discover her body had to bring a ladder the tanks when he, initially they were inspecting it to figure out what was wrong with the water.
Right.
And so they said that they had to bring a ladder out there to get up to the tanks. So that begs the question, even if she got to the roof on her own, how did she get to the top of the tank? However, other reports I've read, and from what little I know about these kind of tanks, say that they do have built-in ladders. There's a very well-known photograph of the tanks on the roof. You can also find that pretty easily if you search.
Either way, it's like, it's as far as body disposal, it's a lot of work to get a body into that tank, whether there's a ladder built onto it or you brought one.
Well, and that's what people are using this as evidence that she was murdered. Like, oh, somebody obviously took a ladder and carried. It's really fucking hard to carry.
Yeah,
she wasn't a big woman, but it's still like,
yeah, try carrying anything and climbing a ladder. It's fucking awkward and weird, and
right.
And especially something as heavy as even like the skinniest person's body. Like, as awkward as that is to carry normally, try doing it climbing
once
up
they're
some
dead
rungs.
weight too. They just I've got a friend that's a firefighter, and that's talk about it's not easy to carry a body,
right?
But and like I said, I've heard conflicting reports. Other people say that there are ladders built into these tanks, so anybody on her own, she could have easily got up there. The picture doesn't show them, but I think that's where the there's no ladder thing comes from. Is there's like, the internet. You get one prominent picture and everybody looks at it and says, look, there's no ladders.
And everyone is suddenly Sherlock Holmes.
Right. The tanks are secured with big metal hatches. And so a lot of people say, well, how could this little girl have possibly opened these hatches? But again, if you pull up the pictures, it shows the hatches. They are metal. They're not that big. They're probably, 3 foot by 3 foot. And there's something that she probably could have managed to open on her own. And then the last thing is, it said when the employee went up there and eventually discovered her body, that the hatch itself was closed. And this is probably the weirdest one, because if she had opened the hatch and jumped in, it was just water, and the water was a good 4 to 6 feet below the top of the tank. They have to estimate, because the water level at the time would have been different than the water level when she entered. But it would be 4 to 6 feet below the hatch, and so if you're even if you're treading water, there'd be no way to get up there and reach up and close that hatch.
Yeah.
Of course, the other possibility, and probably the most likely one anyway, would be that she didn't throw the hatch all the way open, but rather opened it enough, exactly, and then it would close itself. So all these things that people point to as evidence of murder can be explained relatively easily, and through just a normal course of her actions. Mm-hmm. There was also no evidence in her. Before they had found the body, of course, they had searched her room, and there was no evidence of a struggle. There was nothing out of the ordinary. When they found her, there were no injuries on the body outside of some trauma that could be easily explained by the process of the body decomposing in water. Specifically, the autopsy mentioned some bleeding in the, we'll say, rectal area. And so people say, oh, look, she was raped. But the coroner specifically noticed that it was caused from, or likely caused from, bloating of the body. So that's pleasant to think about.
Yeah.
Although to frustrate things, they did take a rape and trauma kit, or at least it appears that they took one, but then never sent it for analysis. So that makes a lot of people mad, because they say, obviously foul play is at fault.
Yeah.
But from the police's point of view, those kits, there's a lot behind it. They're expensive, but it's not really about money. People are more important than that. But there's about time, and there's a large queue of people that have been raped that are waiting for these kits to come back. And because nothing else at all pointed towards foul play, I think that's why they didn't send a kit. They probably should have.
Yeah, I don't know if I hear what you're saying, but your job is to do due diligence in something like this, because whether you see evidence of foul play or not, like, this is a fucking weird situation,
right? And
you should cover your bases as far as stuff like that goes, because it could have been a violent crime. You don't know,
right? So I'm going to, for now, mark murder off the list, just in that, not that it couldn't have been, but that there wasn't really anything strongly pointing towards murder.
Yeah.
Which leaves suicide or accidental death. And I kind of group those in together.
And I was like, that seems like bullshit to me. But the more I think about it, the more it seems to be pointing in that direction.
Yeah, when I say accidental, your first thought's to think, oh, she tripped and fell into the tank. How could that? But that doesn't mean that. It just means that she wasn't trying to kill herself through her actions, but that's what resulted. So Elisa Lam, being a 20-something in 2013, meant that I think legally she had to have a blog. So she regularly posted to her blog, mostly about fashion and stuff, but she did some personal posts, and eventually she closed her blog and like transitioned to Tumblr, and she used that. Mm-hmm. But within all her posts were sprinkled, or within all this fashion stuff that she'd post and that kind of things, were posts detailing her struggles with bipolar disorder and depression. She had been prescribed a number of medications, but had candidly written about how recently she'd had a relapse, and she's going through, another episode, and it had forced her to drop a number of her classes in school. She was worried that, like, doing so, though, would permanently damage her, like, academic record or career. It just showed that she had all these classes, but then couldn't do them and dropped out. And she was afraid that, like, her future, like, she'd just always be seen as... Yeah,
kind of that college... Like, I mean, obviously, bipolar is a unique thing, but that anxiety about, like...
Yeah.
You feel like if you fail now, you won't be able to succeed later.
Exactly.
And that's true for, I think, everyone, and it's probably a million times worse when you have some serious mental illnesses.
Exactly. And I think that this episode was likely the whole reason she left on this trip. I'm not going to say that I fight depression, but I think most of us have depression bouts. And I know especially when I was in college and I'd have, go through stuff, like I would have that. I think we've all get to a point where you're like, I just wish I could fucking just leave everything behind and just like, for me in the East Coast-ish, Midwest East Coast was be like, just leave everything and just like go out West. And when you guys live out West, I imagine it's not come to the East. Who the fuck wants to go to the East Coast?
No, we go further West. We create Alaska, Rapture.
Yeah, like the Into the Wild dude, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
or the BioShock Rapture.
Yeah, we just build a city in the ocean.
Yeah, so to me, when I hear that, she had bipolar and more this part, the depression, and then she left on her own to go on this trip, which she obviously planned and like talked to her parents about, but still, that seems like somebody who's struggling with some stuff. That's something that they would do,
right?
Because you're searching for that relief. Her parents said that while she had battled these conditions for a long time, she had never shown any suicidal tendencies or ever tried to harm herself. I get that families often cover these things up for a lot of reasons, especially her parents immigrated from Hong Kong. And that's a culture that, views personal weakness very, you're supposed to be tough. And America, I'd say we're the exact same way. You're not supposed to show weakness.
Yeah.
So it is possible that she had shown suicidal tendencies, but they're saying, oh no, we couldn't. And there's a lot of reasons for that.
It's
guilty.
Possible. Yeah. I was going to say, like, it's possible that, they're covering up. It's also a huge thing, and it's something that's kind of being talked about more now with like mental illnesses and shit like that. But like the people who are suffering with those things are also very good at hiding it.
Right. Especially to the people that matter to them. Like
right. So if a family can be totally blindsided, right. And that can be
there's
the
a lot
truth.
Of things. Yeah. A lot of things that go into it, but for what it's worth, the family says that she had never, been acted suicidal. I tend to believe that they're right and that her intentions were not to kill herself. Partly, even people that are depressed and decide, they can't take it anymore, they tend to leave some kind of hint or note or something, or, make that last phone call where maybe they don't flat out say, oh, I'll miss you or this or that, or no matter what happened. There tends to be some kind of final clue. Yeah. And there was nothing like that with her. On the flip side, with bipolar disorder, which she also had, people who are experiencing manic episodes often do I wrote it down as irrational things, but things that seem irrational to us, like somebody that hasn't suffered through that disorder.
Right.
And as odd as her actions seem as a whole, individually, if you break them down, they're all symptoms that have been documented in other bipolar, patients. Talking to yourself or believing somebody else is there that isn't hallucinations can be present during a manic episode. Apparent paranoia, where she was hiding in the elevator, that can be part of a manic episode. The erratic limb movements, that happens. You're moving your arms or legs and you don't know why, but it's just part of your pent up whatever. Even the desire to like climb things or just to get out of, try to escape your current surroundings, your room, your house, your state, whatever. That tends to be, fleeing tends to be a symptom of a manic episode. And lastly, like I said, it is weird that they found her naked in this vat, but bipolar people have been known to strip off all their clothes during an episode. It has nothing to do with anything other than they're not, acting in their normal capacity. So with all that in mind, I think that that's the most likely explanation. And I also think it's incredibly sad. I think that's why a lot of us we want to go with either the fantastic and be like, it's cursed and she's a victim of this bad place. Or we want to say it's a murder because then it's nothing that she did. Somebody else did this to her. Although I would say if it's a bipolar episode, she still didn't do it. It's something that happened to her. But I think as humans, it's harder for us to accept that this person was suffering and then just through a circumstance where she was and where she happened to go, and who knows what was going on or going through her mind that night. It's easier we want to have an answer. So those things are answers to be like, well, she just had this going on and ended up in this tank. That's not really an answer, but I think that's what happened.
In some ways, like you said, I get like, in a lot of ways, like ghosts and shit like that are our ways of like trying to understand something that's a little harder to understand. Like in a weird way, like, if it is the accidental death or whatever, which a lot of it points to that's what happened. I think in a lot of ways that's a scarier reality for us to deal with, because it's like, it's not a superstitious, fantastical world we're dealing with. It's that our minds will break and
it could turn on us or betray us. And even if you feel like that wouldn't happen to me, which is, I think, how most of us feel about everything. I mean,
none of us
feel
think
about
we'll fucking
cancer, or car accidents, or whatever.
Yeah.
But even if you feel like, well, I know I've never had any symptoms of this, and it's not something I work. Your spouse, your kids, your parents, it's scary to think that at like any point, really, they could just break, basically.
Yeah.
I hate. I try to be careful when I get into mental. Break's the wrong word because
Like
that makes it sound like it's right. But
I mean, for lack of better terms, it is like there is such a thing as like a mental breakdown,
right?
And like that's when somebody who has like some pre-existing, mental condition, like when it goes to that full extreme. And she was probably in the worst situation she could be in to have a moment like that. She was alone. She didn't have any, support base with her. People who understood what was going on with her to begin with. Apparently a lot of people close in her life to begin with didn't have a clear understanding of what was going on with her.
And like I said, when you're going through that kind of stuff, that tends to be what you want, but it's the worst thing for you. Like there's, there was a part that I had kind of forgot to put in it. When she first checked into this hotel, she was assigned to a shared room, which I think is the weirdest fucking
what
practice.
the fuck is going on at this hotel?
If I'm paying for a hotel room, give me my own damn room.
Right.
So for the first 2 nights there, she had roommates, but they had complained about her odd behavior. And so the hotel on the 3rd night gave her own room. So that also kind of points to, and it just said odd behavior. It didn't sound like she was being violence or anything like that, just off.
Right.
Which is funny because all the accounts from the people interviewed said, oh no, she was happy and nice, but that's what happens. You can...
Like, yeah, manic episodes are about, like, swings in personality and emotion.
So, I don't know. At the end of it's sad. It's gross because people were drinking her for 3 weeks.
Fuck.
It's interesting because it got into the whole, like, this could have happened anywhere, but it has to happen at this hotel that has this history, like, high profile stuff. The Black Dahlia, the Night Stalker.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to, like, when a setting has that kind of history behind it, like, it says a lot about this particular death, like, how chilling it is. And it's like, this one might be, completely just a byproduct of, a mental illness. And, like, and in some ways that's way scarier to me than... like evil people exist, but what happens when it's like your brain working against you, like, and trying to fuck you up?
And I flat out shot it down because I don't believe in it. But if you are a ghost person out there, you're like, fuck you, Steve, they're real and this and that. Oh, maybe you could be right. I'm wrong about a lot of stuff.
Do you want to come on the show?
But this still leaves the door open for that. Like, she struggled with this stuff, and why was this the point at this specific place where it all broke down? It
wasn't ghosts. If you are a ghost person, I'm sorry, but it wasn't ghosts.
Yeah, I'm in that camp too.
But please let us email us and come on the show and tell us why it was, because that's a full episode and a lot less work for me. But yeah, that's like, it's not really a ha-ha funny story. Like, I can't really riff on it like I can most of your other stuff, but that might be my favorite thing you've brought to the table so far.
I kind of thought it would be up your alley because it's got that mix of, like, the mysterious and the...
Yeah, totally. And I feel like you could do a ton of episodes just about this hotel.
It sounds like it. Yeah, like if I hadn't just, like, blown the the punchline on all of them in this one story, that's what... I could have easily, if I hadn't waited to the last second, swung it, and instead of making this the Elisa Lam story, made it the Cecil Hotel story.
Right.
It's an interesting thing, and if, like I said, it's apparently pretty well known. I mean, there's like whole, like, books and websites and all sorts of stuff dedicated to just this hotel. Yeah. But I hadn't heard of it. I kind of, the video seemed a little familiar to me, but like I said, it was only 5 years ago, so it's still relatively recent.
Yeah. And it makes me, like I kind of mentioned earlier, like, this story, it makes me really wonder, like, how much like fucked up shit that we didn't understand that we attributed to, like, supernatural forces or whatever, like, how much of that was just us trying to understand what really comes down to, like, our own fucked up mental health,
right?
And so yeah, that is a fucking weird story. Ugh.
Yep. And it's sad,
it's really sad.
A young girl, she sounded very promising. She was bright, she was likable, but
if you think someone you love, it kind of goes without saying, but you should say it more. If you or someone you know seems to be struggling with any sort of, mental or emotional health issue, no matter how minor, like, reach out to them or reach out to someone if you think you're dealing with it, because, she wasn't going on that trip planning to, like, have a fucking manic breakdown.
Right. That's what I was kind of verbally scratching things out. I think I would go with the ghost thing. It was more plausible than suicide. I don't think she in any way meant to die. I don't think that's the point of the trip. I don't think that was the point of her actions.
Right. Well, and she's, it's not evidence to that, but it's like, it supports the idea. It was like, she's talking about buying gifts for her parents and stuff, it's like to bring
and carrying
back to
them home, like having to take her with her on the rest of her travel. That's not something you think you'd randomly say if you knew you were going to kill yourself.
Yeah.
Plus, it just seems like a weird way to, like, I'm going to kill myself, but to do so, I'm going to climb all the way up to this roof to these vats that she probably didn't know they were up there ahead of time. Like,
yeah.
Who, So yeah,
Yeah, fucked up. Like I said, reach out however you have to.
And then the second point of this story is next time you stay at a hotel, maybe don't drink the water. Jesus.
Yeah, pure filter, portable pure filter. Again, this this episode brought to you by Mental Health and Pure Filters. Oh God, I'm going to hell. But yeah,
that's the show. Yeah,
that's the Non-Essential Podcast. Thanks for listening. I hope it brightened your spirit. Wow, this is a fucked up episode.
But yeah,
like I teed him up with like, hey, this is a happy, quirky, eccentric old dude in San Francisco, and then you're like, isn't fucking bipolar disorder just the worst? See you next week.